Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 25th of March 2024. I've sorted out my camera so it doesn't look like I'm sitting in front of a glaring sun, just my normal crappy lighting as it is. Anyway, let's get to the news, and then before we get to the military aid and equipment section, I want to just go back to the ballistic missiles that were shot into Kyiv this morning. As discussed, it was just filtering through the news as I did my video earlier. 3 injuries were actually, I think it's up to 7 now. Fragments of missiles reportedly damaging a number of different districts in Kyiv. It suffered significant damage. 2 hypersonic, well, some people say Onyx missiles and some people say Zircon missiles, which had previously claimed they were not able to Russians had previously claimed those weren't able to be intercepted by air defense, but they were intercepted. And this is a great thing about having Patriot air defense missile systems around Ukraine, around Kyiv particularly, as the capital city. That's where you would expect the Ukrainians to have the very best air defenses, and these can shoot down things even like Kinzhals. It's now known that a 3-story building was destroyed in central Pechursk area of Kyiv, and it was a gym. Fire service released these photos after the hypersonic missile was taken down. And then, even if air defense works right, the amount of damage that is done with falling debris, these things are traveling at incredible speeds, especially in their terminal phase, if they are taken out in their terminal phase. And since this is over Kyiv and Kyiv is going to be the target, then you can assume it is. And so to take these out is great. It's not going to hit its target, but the kinetic power of these things moving at such an incredibly fast rate, with the trajectory they're on, the angle that they're coming in at, they still have insane destructive capabilities, and that's why they cause the damage they do. Nobody's died, which is really good news, but yeah, as you can see here, pretty destructive capabilities of that falling debris. As a number of known injured in the area has risen to 7, it's become clear that Russia targeted Ukraine's SSU, the security service. The nuclear-capable, unbeatable Zircon missiles, that's what he's now saying instead of Onyx here, Tim, launched from subs were shot down, but the last-minute interception means widespread damage, as I was just saying. So anyway, that's just a bit of an update on that. We're going to go first in the military aid and equipment section to a piece that German Aid to Ukraine has written on his website. I sincerely urge you to go and follow German Aid to Ukraine on Twitter. I always say it's Der Idua, but of course it's DE, standing for Germany, Deutschland, DE Aid UA, Ukrainian Armed Forces, Ukraine. So it's German Aid to Ukraine. That's what Der Idua means, or They Aid UA, however you want to say it. Anyway, someone pointed that out to me. I was like, oh yeah. He's written a piece on this far-reaching rocket artillery capability coalition, which is a thing, right? So the EU and allied nations have got together and said, we are going to create coalitions of countries that are going to help in specific ways. So, for example, the UK, Latvia, and other nations, I think Canada has come on board with the drone coalition. They're looking. Then there's going to be, I think there's a main battle tank or a tank coalition that Germany's just kind of started. And then Olaf Scholz was talking about, the Weimar, the 3 nations of Poland, Germany, and France, when they met recently, were talking about the Weimar Triangle, isn't it? We're talking about starting a far-reaching rocket artillery capability coalition. And lots of people, myself included, were like, oh, does this mean they're going to be thinking about firing missiles into, or difference between rocket and missiles into Russia? Are we talking really long-range capabilities here? Because far-reaching kind of leads us to believe that could be on the cards. Well, actually, or at least according to German Aid to Ukraine, not necessarily so. So just to remind people, there are these different coalitions Eight coalitions, capability coalitions at the moment: Air Force capability, air defense, artillery, armored capabilities, maritime forces, and capabilities coalition. So that's Norway and UK are in that one. IT coalition, I know that some of the Baltic nations big on that. Demining capability and drone capability. And now we've got this new one, so a ninth one by the looks of it. So what does that really mean? And this is a question that German aid to Ukraine is seeking to answer. And talking particularly about when Olaf Scholz came out and discussed this in the Bundestag, answering a question on it. And he said that it is, of course, a matter of enabling Ukraine to carry out defensive military interventions with a range of 80 kilometers, 100 kilometers, or even 150 kilometers, and that the German government is already trying to buy and deliver weapons and ammunition with a range greater than 100 kilometers via its own procurement initiatives, also outside Europe. Another key piece of information is that he used Mars 2 as an example, which is Mars 2 is the equivalent of HIMARS. So we're not talking about rockets or missiles being sent deep into the Russian territory, as in the nation of Russia, the Russian Federation. These are effectively HIMARS equivalent type ammunition and pieces of kit. So even though Germany's Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius said a few days ago that it is all about rocket artillery of whatever range, quote, of whatever range, I think it's easy to guess by Scholz's statement where the journey is heading as far as the range of ammunition is concerned. We are talking about a range of more than 80 to around 150 kilometers. According to the German Chancellor, this is the area that is essentially at stake, at least from the German perspective. Of course, I can't rule out that other members will supply ammunition with an even greater range. France, for example, has already delivered Scalp-PG with a much greater range to Ukraine. In terms of newly produced ammunition, this would mean M30A2, that's 84 kilometers. That's a normal range for, and the M31A2, 84 kilometers. That's a normal range for HIMARS at the moment. Your standard HIMARS rockets or missiles will go to 84 kilometers. And then you've got ER Gimlers, so extended range Gimlers will fly to 150 kilometers, and they did get hold of a couple of those. There's 20 or so of those, and they fired them at Berdyansk and other air bases. But they desperately need more, or perhaps even GLSDB, so ground launched small diameter bombs. So these are the Saab, Boeing co-production of dumb missiles or dumb rockets that have been given kits rather like the JDAMs or the Russian carb bombs, but instead of being launched from or dropped from the sky and gliding and being guided, they're launched from HIMARS, but they're just a cheaper way of firing rockets with a longer range, and they can go up to 150 kilometers. The latter have not been in service with the AFU for long, and the remains of a GLSDB were first found in February 2024 near Kreminna in Luhansk. We don't know how many of these they have at the moment and how often they are using them. Ideally, this should mean large orders for the American defense industry, even if it is, of course, possible to buy ammunition from US Army stocks, especially in the short term, to deliver the ammunition to Ukraine as quickly as possible and not wait for the new production from manufacturers. There is certainly one name that many people still have in mind: the Army Tactical Missile System, in short ATACMS. Even if it's a basic M39 variant, which was already delivered to Ukraine by the US in small quantities last year, it more or less is still within the range of 150 kilometers mentioned by Scholz. I doubt that he would support a delivery. The ATACMS missile is filled with 950 M74 bomblets, so these are the cluster variants, each the size of a tennis ball, which are dispersed across a circular area about 206 meters in diameter. This means that at least the M39 variant, which Ukraine already received, and the newer M39A1 variant are to be categorized as cluster munitions. However, Germany is part of the Oslo Convention, the ban on cluster munitions, and has already completely destroyed its own stocks by the end of 2015. I therefore think it is unlikely that Germany will acquire the M39 or M39A1 variants and deliver them to Ukraine. But this does not necessarily apply to other members of the new capability coalition. Another option for Germany would be to push a limit a little and supply ammunition with a range of up to 300 kilometers. In this case, it would be quite possible to supply Ukraine with ATACMS of the M48, M57 and M57E1 variant. The major difference would be that these versions do not rely on submunitions but have unitary warheads, so a single explosive warhead. This naturally depends on the will of the German government, above all Olaf Scholz. However, this may take a while. As Pistorius said, the far-reaching rocket artillery capability coalition is still very new, and the implementation, including the distribution of tasks, can easily take some time. Thanks to German aid to Ukraine, really good stuff there. Now, French aid to Ukraine, a similar handle here on Twitter, says, quote, and quoting from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, "I would particularly like to defend my Dutch and German colleagues. Germany is a country in Europe that, from a bilateral point of view, gives the most funding to Ukraine. We must not point the finger at them. On the contrary, we must welcome the efforts that are being made." So this is trying to close that chasm between the nations where there's been a bit of like divisive rhetoric or divisive rhetoric. Come on, be British. I like that German aid to Ukraine has some British spelling of some of the words and punctuation protocols, so he's on the right side of grammar. Anyway, shut up, Piers. So this is a good move for Emmanuel Macron to try and make it look like the Germans and the French are singing off the same song sheet, and that they are unified in their approach to Ukraine. So he continued, "In recent weeks, we've continued to increase bilateral and joint funding for Ukraine and to increase visibility. What we want to do now is to say whether we should go much further, whether we should go even deeper, whether the situation should deteriorate, whether funding other than European funding should run out. We have to be ready and have more radical and more innovative solutions," and possibly making hints about troops in Ukraine there. "We will continue to work on this issue, particularly on the Franco-German basis." Good news. That's exactly the kind of rhetoric we want to hear, and it'd be great to hear that from Germany as well. Now, moving on to the, possibility or not of American aid getting to Ukraine. There's been so much going on in US politics recently. So we've got, goodness me, we've got Mike Gallagher stepping down earlier than normal, but leaving it so that his seat can't be replaced before the election. So there's a really clever thing that Mike Gallagher did as an American member of the House of Representatives, so the lower house, of which there are 438 of them. Anyway, there's a 218. You need a 218 vote to get a majority, and the Republicans have now, with Mike Gallagher leaving, just a majority of one. So it's as thin as you can possibly get. And we knew he wasn't going to run, I think, in November 2024. He'd already announced his resignation, but rather like Ken Buck had done, then decided to do it earlier. But he did it in a way that really left the Republicans. I mean, this was a big statement from Mike Gallagher. He's really sort of anti-MAGA, and his statement was like, "I'm gonna go early, which is going to leave you with a really slim majority, but I'm going to wait until a particular time and then go early," which is like now this week, whereby it's close enough to November that they don't elect another person in, so they can't replace him with another, say for example, MAGA Republican, and still have a 2-seat majority. It will stay empty, and so therefore the majority of the Republicans is really particularly slim. So that's an issue. Then you've got Lisa Murkowski, who's the Alaskan senator, who's a Republican, who's made some really interesting remarks to CNN on the fly, where they're walking down a corridor, and she is like, "Yeah, not really. I can't stand behind Trump, especially given the election debacle, and the notion that I would have to stand behind Trump is a real problem." So it's looking like she may either, I don't know, she might just give up being a Republican and campaign on being an independent. Who would she caucus with? And what does that mean in terms of the Senate majority? The Senate's going to be interesting going forward because the Democrats can't afford to lose a single senator in the upcoming Senate elections, where a third of them are up in November 2024. The polls are looking quite good for the Democrats, but there's no margin for error. So if Lisa Murkowski is like saying at the moment, well, okay, making hints that she either may not run or would run as an independent, then you could get a Democrat in, or if she wins, then she might caucus with the Democrats on some things. So that's interesting in the Senate. So there's all this political chaos going on, and all the while, Mike Johnson still not floored this bill. And then you have the bill that has been given okay by the Senate at 70 to 29 voting majority, and this is the best bill that Ukraine would get as it presently stands. So that he could just take that bill and put that on the floor. Then you got two discharge petitions. One from the Democrats would take that bill and run with it, or the discharge petition put forward by the Republicans would be a much worse version of that Senate bill. Or Mike Johnson could table another bill, adapt it. Then I presume that would have to go back to the Senate to be ratified. And the idea is that that's going to be worse. And so here's the situation. Mike Johnson has announced that they're going to vote on Ukraine after Easter. This is what we've seen from him, which is delay, and now further delay. So that's going to take place after Easter. But there are some people saying that he is committed to this, that he is wanting to get Ukraine aid to Ukraine. But here's the problem I have, and this is my pronouncement, and I'd be interested to see what you Republicans out there think, is that if Mike Johnson, for example, truly, genuinely was interested in giving aid to Ukraine and saw that as important as it really is, that at least as important as I find it, then he would not want to make a worse deal for Ukraine. Anything that is not the Senate passed bill will be a worse iteration of that. It would be would be watering it down, or turning grants to loans, or doing something that makes that bill worse. And so while we might sing the kind of praises, maybe no, I certainly wouldn't, but why we might go, thank goodness this has come through finally, when the House of Representatives will eventually pass something for Ukraine. If it's not that bill, it will be worse, and that is Republicans making it worse. Like, it's not the Democrats making it worse. So this is no longer anything to do with, well, attaching it to the border. This is nothing to do with border stuff and, well, Biden could have just reversed X, Y, and Z on border regulations. This is Republicans saying, okay, we are going to do Ukraine aid. This is Ukraine aid, right? But that good aid package, we are going to make worse. And if it comes out being worse than the initial Senate passed bill, that is the Republicans making Ukraine aid a worse Ukraine aid. And I can't see it any other way. So I'd be interested whether that is being fair, or whether, as a Republican, you disagree with that, and why you would disagree with that. It just seems to me that the Democrats are the ones that want to support Ukraine more than at least some important Republicans. US House will presumably be able to proceed to vote on aid to Ukraine after Easter. This will likely be a modified package favoured by House Speaker Mike Johnson, intended to make part of the aid a loan. Johnson said his commitment is to put it on the floor after Easter, and we are working on this bill, said Senator McCall. So he's a Republican who is in favour, but he's also been pretty critical of the Republican approach to helping out Ukraine. As a Republican himself. Okay, the state budget of Ukraine has received $230 million as a loan from the Japanese government for the restoration of agriculture as part of the ARISE project. This was reported by the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine. The project provides support for agricultural producers in financing through preferential lending, compensation of expenses under the 579 program, and improvement of small farms' access to financing through grants. Okay, so that's really not too much military aid news. We're going on to geopolitics. So Russia is waging a hybrid war against Moldova, according to the foreign minister. The hybrid war unleashed by the Russian authorities is in full swing in Moldova. Russia has not abandoned its intentions. It has changed its tactics, Moldovan Interior Minister Adrian Efros has said. This is completely to be expected. The involvement in the Moldovan political scene in elections is going to be very heavy, as we have seen in Serbia and Slovakia, and indeed, of course, Hungary and elsewhere in Eastern Europe, and indeed Western Europe. The Russian influence in our information spaces is one of the biggest worries, globally speaking, going forward. Along this kind of line, Maya Sandu, the president of Moldova, said the question of providing support to Ukraine has never been so urgent as now. So this is kind of explaining why the Russians would be so interested in upsetting the elections in Moldova, for the obvious reasons that Moldova, at least under Sandu, are very supportive of Zelensky and Ukraine, and of course the Transnistria, Galagia, and other areas of Moldova that have very high pro-Russian sentiment, or at least there's a lot of Russian involvement in those areas. Right. This is an incorrect interpretation from Jay in Kyiv of what President Vucic of Serbia has said. He says, seems Serbians are starting to see that Putin might not really be their friend. President Vucic warns that Russians likely plan terror attacks in his country as well. Actually, he's misinterpreted this, but let's listen to what Vucic actually says. So he says, let's read it out to you as he says it. And we will be merciless to anyone who tries to threaten the security of any citizens of the Republic of Serbia. Okay, sounds fair enough, I guess. So they should be endangering the security of this country. So we will talk about that in the next period. Who are you talking about now? About various people who, having fled the war, came here to teach us how the security situation in Serbia should look like. I didn't say anything precise enough. So, okay, what's going on here? And okay, it's not a huge discussion. It's just a little excerpt taken out of context. But actually, what, as far as I understand it, Vucic is talking about is not like Russians in general and being anti-Russian. This is Vucic being anti the people who have escaped Russia and escaped the war and are anti the war being in Serbia. So this is actually clamping down on anti-war Russian clamping down on Russians who are anti-war. Indeed, Ivana Stradner says after the terrorist attack in Russia, the president of Serbia openly says that anti-Putin Russians who are in Serbia are a threat to Serbian security, and they and the Serbian government should be merciless. New measures are on the horizon. So this is like the direct opposite to what Jay in Kiev was kind of saying. Serbian president had a National Security Council meeting right after the terrorist attack in Russia. Now they will go after Russian opposition in Serbia to completely silence them. This is what Ivana Stradner said the other day. I read this out to you the other day. This is how Serbian and Russian intelligence cooperate. Reportedly, according to RT sources close to the Serbian government, the special services of Serbia plan to repel Russians who attended protests against authoritarian Vucic regime. In other words, this is typical Vucic staying well inside the sphere of influence of Russia, and being fairly obvious with that. There are some more to just mention from Ivana Stradner. It's not coming up there. But anyway, here we have some more. So the replies. So there's more. In December, after Serbia's elections, some Russians joined protests against the authoritarian government in Serbia. Then they received a warning about it and threats of what will happen to them if they go after the Serbian president. New measures that he will impose are also to strengthen his authoritarian regime and use it as a bargaining chip against the West, so Brussels and Washington get scared and give him concessions. This is also because in June there might be new protests because of elections. The campaign has already started. Yesterday I found on Telegram that anti-war Russians posted a warning that police are all over Belgrade stopping gatherings. So yeah, it is the wrong direction for Serbia to be going in. Vucic is really wearing his heart on his sleeve there, and it's pretty obvious where his sympathies lie. Zelensky has had a conversation with the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez. Quote, we agreed to accelerate work on a preparation of bilateral security agreement between Ukraine and Spain. So there are lots of these bilateral security agreements taking place, supposedly being based on the first one that was between the UK and Ukraine, that's acting as a blueprint for all these other ones. Belgian Prime Ministers urge EU to reject Russian nuclear fuel. Alexander De Cruz says that the EU is replacing one dependence with another in its quest to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. So this is part of possibly decarbonising the industries and energy markets in Europe, but moving towards nuclear. In doing so, is playing into Russian dependence or dependence on Russia. And the problem with that is obviously energy security is compromised, and also it's giving money to Russia. So if Russia is producing a lot of the uranium, as nuclear fuel for Europe. If they are setting up nuclear power plants through Rosatom and then servicing those plants, and then no other agency is able to do the work that Rosatom does, then it means that Rosatom can't effectively be sanctioned, and that's a problem that Europe has at the moment. There is this move to try and replace some of those services provided by Rosatom with a coalition of other nations and entities that are coming together to form an alternative to a nuclear alternative to Rosatom. But here, trying to get off that dependence of Russian nuclear fuel, it has a similar challenges to trying to get off the dependence of Russian hydrocarbons. It can be done, but it needs to be well thought through, and it might take some time. Okay, Jane Kyiv here says Russia is trying to cause a civilian airline disaster in Northern Europe, and it's barely news. When it happens, they'll issue 20 conflicting narratives and blame Ukraine. That's pretty accurate as far as I can work out. So what's he talking about? Well, Baltic Jammer has been running for 47 consecutive hours, making this the longest run ever. Red dot, so this is, I presume, some kind of working out what's going on with electronic warfare and jamming and whatnot in the Baltic Sea area. You can see here you've got Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, these three Baltic nations, and then you have Kaliningrad. And then below that, going into Poland and even Germany, you have this massive area of jamming, as well as up in Estonia. This is as you would come out of St. Petersburg along here and into the Baltic Sea. So two major areas of jamming. Red dots show the affected areas. Yesterday at 2200 hours, so that's 10 o'clock at night, it changed into a new configuration. Green dots, anyway, the point being 1,614 unique airplanes were affected, most of them civilian airliners. Wow, just quite incredible. A green dot map shows a new configuration, fully focused on almost exclusively Polish-controlled airspace, leaving a nice clear corridor for Kaliningrad flights. In other words, flights can come out from Kaliningrad there and, go and do whatever the Russians want them to do, and yet everywhere else is being jammed by, one presumes, activity coming from Kaliningrad. And then there's lots of geeky metrics that you can look at, jamming metrics for the last 3 days. I mean, I have very little idea of what any of this means, but if you are nerd-tastic, then you can find out more about this. And then a list of airplanes that have been affected. We had this with Grant Shapps, the UK Defence Minister, recently, who had his plane that was jammed. And that caused quite a ruckus itself. So anyway, there you go. Something probably needs to be done about that. Right, and Applebaum here saying and talking about political situation in America. Trump has decided that he doesn't want money to go to Ukraine. It's a really extraordinary moment, she says. We have an out-of-power ex-president who is, in effect, dictating American foreign policy on behalf of a foreign dictator. And those are really strong words, but I don't disagree with what she says here.
Is this, you're not only an expert on Ukraine, you actually understand Republican and conservative politics very, very well. What portion of the Republican Party does Marjorie Taylor Greene represent on these, in her position on Ukraine?
It's very hard to tell because some of the people who are opposed to aid for Ukraine seem to have real motives. I mean, that's too much money or America first or something like that, and that might be genuine. Some of them seem to be acting performatively on behalf of Donald Trump. And I think Mike Johnson might be one of those. Trump has decided that he doesn't want money to go to Ukraine, and he wants Ukraine to be weaker. There's a lot of different speculation about why that would be. Maybe he has some deal in his head that he's going to do, if he wins. Maybe he imagines some kind of partition. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't want to, scare everybody with the details, but, he's been very, very clear that he doesn't want the House to pass this money. And there are enough people in the House who either support him or are afraid for their own seats, they're afraid of being primaried, that they have gone along with it. I think that, more than anything else, explains where we are. I mean, it's really an extraordinary moment, and we have a out-of-power ex-president who is, in effect, dictating American foreign policy on behalf of a foreign dictator or with the interests of a foreign dictator in mind. And I don't think we've been through this before.
So this is pertaining to what I was talking about earlier in the military aid segment, but people are worried as Republican lawmakers, particularly in the House of Representatives, where you are up for re-election every 2 years. So it means that, and I've said this many times before, but those in the House of Representatives are always campaigning. As soon as you won an election, you are campaigning for your next election. And you are beholden to your base a lot more than, say, senators who are up once every 6 years. So you've got 100 senators, 438 representatives. So the senators, they're voted in, their elections come every 6 years. And so they get voted in, and then they think, well, I don't need to campaign for another 5 years. And so actually, let's just start thinking about what America needs. So the senators do the serious job of thinking about like foreign policy and whatnot. And the House of Representatives lawmakers don't, because that's kind of not, well, it's not they're not their remit, but it's they have to concern themselves with local stuff much more, and their base, because they are campaigning to get elected in straight away after winning an election. And so they are going to be worried about what the base think, whilst also, if Trump, for example, says you need to not vote on Ukraine, otherwise we won't fund your re-election campaign, it means that they'll get, as she said there, they'll get primaried. And what that means is that in that 2 years, so this will be happening coming up to November, any lawmaker in the House of Representatives, well, every lawmaker will be running for election in November 2024. And each of those Republicans will be thinking, right, if I do something to piss off Trump, then my campaign will not get money from the RNC. Now, remember that the RNC, the Republican National Committee, has just merged with the Trump campaign. And there's all the worry that the RNC, the Republican money, will be going to pay for his legal woes. But this is super important for Ukraine aid. This is why I speak so much about American politics, is because it's so freaking important. Now, if these are the people who are going to vote for any bill that Mike Johnson puts through, and if they're thinking, right, I don't have a job in November if I don't get money from the RNC. Trump owns the RNC now. So if I don't do what Trump says, I will not get campaign funding, which means I lose my job as a politician. And so, therefore, even if I believe Ukraine should get aid, I can be as strongly supportive of Ukraine getting aid. But if I think it's more important that I keep my own job than it is that Ukraine gets aid, so I'm putting my own personal existential future over the future of Ukraine. And naturally, there will be most politicians, I think, that would probably do that, right? And so you will get a lot of Republican politicians who will be scared to cross the line. What this has meant is that people who aren't prepared to do that have realised that they probably aren't going to get voted in November. So people like Ken Buck and Mike Gallagher have said, I'm not going to get voted in because of this situation. And I feel so strongly about this stuff and this chaos that's going on, and having a party that's being dictated to by Donald Trump, who's not even in power, that I'm going to resign. Because it's a lose-lose for me, and I'm going to try and get a job somewhere else doing X, Y, and Z, lobbying or on TV or whatever. That's the situation. This is super important. She's absolutely right to say these people are afraid of being primaried, and we have a former president who is in effect dictating American foreign policy on behalf of a foreign dictator. And I'm sorry, like, that's how I see it as well. I'm not sorry. That's just the reality of the situation. And hopefully there will be some Republicans who are strong enough to go across the floor and vote with their conscience rather than voting with their future job prospects in mind. Right, moving on to a subject I wouldn't normally talk about, which is the Princess of Wales. Why am I talking about her? So just to give you the heads up, there was all this controversy that she had edited a photograph that she had submitted to basically a picture agency. And it was right that people got up in arms about that. Some people, I mean, I had like my family and people like Greg Terry actually contacted me and said, well, what's all this about? What's going on? And I explained, right, the reason why this is super important is, again, it's to do with misinformation, disinformation, all sorts going forward. And this is a really minor thing, right? So she had a picture taken recently by her husband, the Prince of Wales, took a picture of the family, and then she touched it up and then sent it on. Like, I don't know, put a hand there or change the lighting there or rubbed out something over there. It's not that important, except it is important. And the reason it's important is because it's a slippery slope. So if you start allowing people to change photographs in any way, it's the slippery slope fallacy. Where do you stop? So you either don't have it at all, or you allow everything. Right? You can't easily arbitrarily draw a line to say, well, that kind of editing is okay, but this kind isn't. And so therefore, if you're a picture agency and you're taking in photographs for the press and media, you need to make sure that those pictures are genuine, like fully 100% genuine. So you can then take them to the public and say, look, or sell it to a newspaper and say, look, here's a photo that's 100% genuine. The newspaper puts it out. If 2 weeks down the line, the newspaper's then found to have produced or printed a photo that is not correct, then actually the newspaper get in the crap for it, and rightly so. And so therefore there needs to be this sense of integrity going through. And that's why the Princess of Wales was called out on this. She may not have thought about all this, but just simply touching something up nicely like that opens a whole can of worms to you get to the deep fakes, which is, how do we know that even that entire scene is correct? How do we know, if you can manipulate stuff on pictures, which you can so freaking easily these days, we need to be so careful. We need to have, press entities and picture agencies need to have absolute faith and confidence that the pictures that they are receiving and the pictures that they are selling on are not altered. Okay, so that's to do with disinformation. That's not to do with actually this point here. But anyway, it started with that happening, and then also there was all this kerfuffle concerning that. And then it's almost as if, like, okay, we need to dampen down this criticism. Okay, now's the right time for you to announce this. And she announced that she has got cancer and she's receiving cancer therapy. And then everyone's like, oh, okay, let's stop criticizing you. And rightly so, okay. And all this is happening. So those are the two things that have taken place with regard to the Princess of Wales. So she's just about to go through, or is going through, cancer treatment. Now, Shashank Joshi, referring to a Daily Telegraph piece here, saying, we need to be a bit clearer on whether this is just a Global Times shit-stirring or something more serious. So, quote, China, Russia and Iran are fueling disinformation about the Princess of Wales to destabilise the nation, Whitehall sources believe. The UK is considering, quote, boosting the role of fact-checking organisations, but officials are wary that this could lead to a new set of controversies. Another option being studied by the task force is whether social media companies can contain the speed at which disinformation is shared. And here we get back to freedom of speech and the responsibility of people like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc., as effectively publishers, but they're technically not publishers, which is why they get away with being able to allow loads of disinformation to get published by each individual handle, but not have to do anything about it. But there is this sense that, look, like I talk about all the time, look, if we're at war with other nations, and you could call this an information war or a real war with Russia, if we're at an information war with these nefarious entities, we need to fight against that. And just pulling out the freedom of speech card every time is not good enough when the disinformation tangibly harms our elections or our population with what they believe, or leads to deaths on the battlefield in Ukraine because people are believing nonsense stuff about Ukraine and voting accordingly, etc., etc. So disinformation has tangible ramifications, tangible collateral damage that happens. And just saying freedom of speech and allowing that to take place is dangerous. It's literally like, in the same way that we don't allow people to shout fire in a theatre, and therefore people stampede and cause problems. So we say you're not allowed to do that. And like, I can't stand up on a plane and shout bomb, there's a bomb, and cause all sorts of chaos, and then the plane crashes because of all the chaos or whatever. It's like, so there's freedom of speech, but then there's also responsibilities for that right to say what we like, and if we don't recognise those responsibilities, then there needs to be regulation to stop us doing things that are super dangerous. And this is one of those situations where the disinformation is so prevalent online and it's so dangerous that we need to do something about it. And this is where we have, like in this case, a UK task force, government task force, trying to work out what to do about disinformation coming from China and Russia and Iran. that is effectively another way of doing war. Like, we wouldn't stand back and let those armies invade our nations. Why do we stand back and let their disinformation invade our brains? Literally, our minds are being infected with disinformation from abroad. We need to do something about that. Quite what, I don't know, but I would certainly say that Facebook and Twitter need to pull the fingers out their backsides and that thumbs out their backsides and actually do something more robust. My tuppence. Anyway, thanks for listening. Take care. Speak soon.